But maybe I will stop. Are there any questions just about this part? I think we'll take a short little pause and then start the more practical coding section.
Any questions for Olivia?
I might have one that I'm not entirely formulating in my head, but why, maybe I understand how you got to HYDRA, but why did you have the desire for HYDRA in a way? Or why did you have that desire of network technology and the visual chaos, the organized chaos that you are setting up?
I think there's a lot of different things, interests that led towards this. One kind of more concrete thing is that I was giving a lot of coding workshops where I had each student was on their own computer, and I kind of hated how in the workshop everyone was only interacting with their computer and not other people in the room. And so one of the initial at first, I just created a library to add on to P5 that let people stream what they were doing to other people within the workshop. And it was really hard for people to use. And so I started creating my own thing that would make it a little easier to use. But it was that experience of people learning something, and I kind of wanted it to be immediately somehow collaborative, but not in this way where it's a group project and everyone has to come to a consensus about what they're doing, but more in this way of you can be creative and kind of your creative thing could relate to someone else's creative thing without having it be a whole like decision process.
Thank you.
I really like this idea of having collaboration at the heart of that thing, and kind of really thinking about the groups that you're teaching and kind of their experiences. And as you say, not just on the screen, it's about who's around you and how you respond to each other.
Yeah, and it's been like sort of an ongoing process. Like one thing I use a lot within HYDRA is the concept of feedback loops, but I also kind of believe in it as a creative process or a development process of trying something, seeing what happens, changing something, trying again, trying something else. And so HYDRA, it's really grown from just these isolated experiments to now there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people using it. And then there's kind of offshoots or people building their own tools that use it in some way. And part of, I started at the beginning of saying how kind of technical decisions also become decisions about community. And that's something, for example, I think you could see my screen right now. Just when you go to the website, this is HYDRA's website, and this is the code editor or text editor, and maybe it like looks different than some other text editors that you might be used to or something. And when you close this pop-up, you immediately see, this happens to be one that I did, but you immediately see code that someone else has written. And I think this is like a technical decision or a design decision if I wanted the editor to look like this, but it's also, I think an idea at the heart of it is that everyone is kind of building off of stuff that other people are doing. And also the idea of there's kind of sketches that lots of different people have created in the editor as soon as you load it. And so you already sort of hopefully maybe feel, oh, there's like a lot of people who are involved in this. And that's something that's inherent to all software. Like all software, someone wrote it and it is built on something that someone else wrote, that someone else wrote, that someone else wrote. But often the goal is to really kind of obfuscate that and make it seem as if some genius coder just like started with a blank terminal and created everything, when that's never the actual, how creation happens. And so something with this also is, so in the editor, there's a share button. And when you share what you make, it goes to this Twitter bot. that was sort of a way for me to have free hosting, but it goes straight to this Twitter bot, and so there's lots of sketches in this Twitter bot. Here's one that someone did an hour ago, and so what happens is when you click on a link in the Twitter bot, it immediately opens up the editor. Oh, this one's a quite complicated one. I'm not sure what happened, but I'll try a different one. It immediately opens the editor up and loads that code directly. And then you could directly edit the code that someone else wrote and create your own kind of version of it. And when you re-upload it to Twitter, it shows what you've done, and it says that it's based on what the other person did. And so in that way, it's kind of showing this kind of collaborative creative process. And that was interesting to me as well, because I made this and then saw that people were making things with it that I had never imagined, and making it easier to share also helped me learn about my own tool in this way.
Yeah.
And I think something that comes up also with this is people will find something they like on Twitter, and then they'll in the gallery, and then they'll start playing with it, and then they'll wonder, okay, well, I played with this, I changed a few numbers, but now is what I did, is it mine or is it theirs? And I think that's a really interesting question that doesn't necessarily have an answer. But I kind of like that this happens, because it happens a lot. I feel like with especially kind of generative art, where people copy a lot of things that other people have done. And a lot of times that process isn't very transparent. And so I've seen people, for example, perform with HYDRA and in the code, like reference other people that they've borrowed snippets of code from. And I really enjoy that, because it's also kind of making this open source thing, also just making it more transparent than it often is.
Yeah. And that's massively important, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, and I actually want to say one more thing about that. With open source, often there's just the question of, oh, is this open source or is it not open source? And it's treated as this yes or no thing. And more and more, I don't think that really exists, because I think there's so many open source projects, like, for example, Linux, that I would never be able to modify myself, just because the amount of like contextual knowledge or situated for me to be able to edit Linux. There's so many, like, I just personally don't know how to do this in this moment or something. And so there's whether the source code is available, but then actually whether you as an individual can modify the source code in a way that is relevant to what you're kind of doing with it. And so something that happened with making the code so easy to edit is that it brings up some more of these questions about really what is open source. And to me, it's also making it kind of easy to appropriate aspects of what it is. One example that always comes to mind is there's this software called, or it's a physical space called Dynamic Land in the Bay Area, and it's open source software, but all the software is written on pieces of paper that are in the physical space. And so it's only open source if you're actually in the physical space and able to copy the pieces of paper. And to me, it kind of illustrates that open source is this continuum of how easy is it to appropriate this into something like relevant to me.
Yeah, definitely. Is there any questions for Olivia before we have a quick 2 or 3 minute break? It's just we want to kind of build in breaks, and then we're going to get into some practical stuff.
You have a couple more questions. Sorry. Okay. One very pragmatic. What kind of coding language is it from, or is it,
It's JavaScript, and it's using a kind of specific library and syntax that I developed. on top of JavaScript, but everything in JavaScript also works in HYDRA. And also HYDRA is its own library, so you could also use it in a website that isn't this website.
Thank you. And the other one is a bit more, listening to how you structure, or actually, I don't know if there's a kind of, obviously there's a relation, like we talk about open source and actually how HYDRA becomes this place of actually rethinking about what open source is. But there's also in terms of how you, the idea of collaboration, the decentralization of the server, the community itself, and the authorship. And I'm just wondering whether combine, what kind of environment have you created, a structure that might well be a reflection of our own culture, or maybe computational structure, I'm not sure, but I'm just wondering whether there's certain values there in your own construction of HYDRA that comes through it. I think certainly in terms of feminist practice and thinking, seems to, the idea of sharing practice, of collaboration and community, which is not exclusively to feminist practice, but and a decentral, we talked on Wednesday about hierarchy and there's a sense of hierarchy. Where is the hierarchy in all of this? Which maybe that's part of your work where it's not in there. The point is that it's distributed.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is distributed in the way that you can kind of engage with HYDRA, but there's also, it's also maybe I'm pretty protective of my own vision within that in some ways. So like I make most of the decisions about the core HYDRA, and other people kind of build things on top of that. But I'm very sort of, at first I wanted to make this open source project where lots of people would change whatever they wanted to. And now part of the whole thing about people being able to fork it and create their own is that we don't have to have this kind of voting process about things all the time. And not that there's anything wrong, but for me, it's also okay within that to be very protective of aspects of my own vision of it, in that it's open source, but that doesn't mean that anyone can come in and change it. And that's something that's been interesting for me to kind of learn about as it goes on.
Thank you.